Okay, good morning everybody. My name's Mark Aspen. I'm the General Manager of the Pastoral Greenhouse Gas Research Consortium, and I'm chairing the session today on the third webinar in the Towards a Lower Emissions Future series that's been run by the New Zealand Agricultural Research Consortium, Greenhouse Gas Research Centre, and the Ministry for Primary Industries. Today, this session is titled Perspectives from the Land, and you'll see a wee map on the just over my left shoulder, and there's 3 dots on that if you've got keen eyesight, and we're going to hear from 3 farmer perspectives on reducing greenhouse gas emissions while maintaining the bottom line. We have one presentation from an owner of a dairy and arable farms down near Methven, one from a sheep and beef farmer near Katikati, and the other a dairy farmer at Tokoroa. So firstly, before we rip into it, we have an hour for these webinars, and so we want to get moving. A few notes on the format and introduction for all our participants. The recordings of this session will be made available for future viewings via the website at the Greenhouse Centre. Today we'll also hear and then follow up with a question and answer session, so near the end of the hour. So there is a question and answer panel that you can enter your questions into, and so please submit your questions as we go, and we'll try and get through as many as we can in the time we've got. If you do see a question that you like and you'd agree with, please use the upvote button so we know that that's a popular one, and I'll work hard to try and make sure we get an answer from our panelists on that. And don't worry if your answer is not answered, if your question is not answered. If you see it's been dismissed, it doesn't mean it won't be answered later. We will be working to summarise all the questions and make additional answers available on the website after this webinar. So that's the wee homework to start the day. None of you would have been through the first 2, so this is the third in the series of 6. Thanks for joining us, and without any further ado, we'll get into presenter 1, and that is Craig McKenzie. And a little wee bio before we run to Craig. He is an innovative cropping and dairy farmer from Methven, New Zealand. He has been farming since 1984 and has developed a keen interest in sustainable farming practices and innovative solutions for New Zealand agriculture. His focus is on utilising precision agricultural systems to maximise nutrient and irrigation efficiency for improved farm sustainability, both environment and financial. So let's have a look at the video that came in from Craig.
So I'm Craig McKenzie. So we're farming in the central part of Canterbury, in mid-Canterbury. So who are we and what do we do? Well, we're arable farmers and dairy farmers. Predominantly, we have a 200 hectare arable farm, and we run a 330 hectare dairy operation next door. We also have we're founders and directors of a precision agriculture company, which was AgriOptics, is now Vantage Agriculture New Zealand. So this particular property here, or both properties, are fully irrigated properties and intensive operations, both of them, but mainly the arable one is in seed production. The dairy is in high-end production, I guess, and we're focused on sustainability. Where did it all start for me was in 2008. I was fortunate to be awarded a Nuffield Scholarship, and we were looking at understanding a carbon footprint in farming systems. The interesting thing is we went down the track, and I had the opportunity to travel the world for 6 months and looking at all the different systems, and I guess one of the first things I had to get my head around was, do we actually believe in climate change? Because if we don't believe in climate change, then we probably don't need to think too much about carbon footprinting and reducing our carbon emissions. But I spent some time at Colorado State University, and then I also went to NCAR in Colorado and looked at the modelling that the US government does through NCAR, and it became very clear that climate change exists, in my opinion, and from what I saw there with the scientists. But if you can't measure it, you can't model it, and if you can't model it, you can't mitigate it. So we needed to make sure that we could model it and understand what's going on. And then what are the next steps, I guess, for us was around looking at reducing our emissions intensity per kilogram produced. And using soil moisture and irrigation wisely was actually, for us, a very strong part of the background, because it actually allowed us to do a whole lot of other things. I guess it's important to understand where we're coming from and what's happening, but good sustainable farming practices and the most profitable farming practices go hand in hand. And that is the only way that we're going to be able to be sustainable to invest in technology going forward, which will allow us to be able to make the mitigations that we require. And it became really clear really quickly that if you want to reduce your carbon footprint, then precision agriculture was the way forward. If you can reduce your inputs by 30% and maintain your outputs, you've just reduced your carbon footprint by 30%. So it became interesting looking at different systems around the world, but also the other thing that became pretty clear that some of the very best farmers in the world are right here in New Zealand, and we should congratulate the farmers that are here rather than actually try to berate them all the time. The other thing that is also important, I spent some time at the FAO in the last couple of years, and this is some data that came out of there, that population growth is going to increase by 20% between now and 2050 roughly, and there's obviously some speed bumps going on at the moment around the world, but and our land area is going to reduce by 21%. So we can actually be focused on reducing carbon emissions, which is very important, but also we need to be also focused on food production. We have a growing population that we need to feed and have a responsibility to feed. Why did we engage in lower emissions down this pathway? Well, we just basically wanted to be a lot better at what we did. And if we could do that, then the rest would follow. And if you look at crops like are in that slide there, having crops that are particularly even, then that meant that we could reduce our footprint and be a whole lot more efficient around emissions by actually reducing our inputs. So spatial application was really important, but we'll get to that. Why did we want to know our number? Well, we had to have a baseline to be able to start from. If we didn't have that baseline number, then we were never going to be able to reduce it. Through the different models, they change, but actually we needed to know what our starting point was, both in nitrate leaching, but also CO2 emissions. And if we go back to 2013, we were at 2.6 on nitrous oxide emissions. The tools that we use to understand this, and I guess if farmers, we need to know what our soils are. If we don't know what our soils are, then we can't do anything. So we actually have EM mapped the property, and that's one of our properties with a huge amount of variability, but a huge amount of detail. But once we had that, it meant that we could actually spatially manage that. Variable rate irrigation is one of the key tools that allows us to do other things, but we also do things like we're doing variable rate seeding, variable rate fertilizer, variable rate nitrogen. We're looking at variable rate fungicides, variable rate insecticides, all at the appropriate time, and that allows us to make some significant savings. And nitrogen, for argument's sake, with 1% of nitrogen deemed to be nitrous oxide emission, then if we can reduce that by 20 or 30%, then we've actually made a large difference. The results that we've used were around irrigation efficiency was one of the key ones initially. So if you take away the use of pumps, and which we've done in the system, we've turned everything into a gravity pressurized system, then it gives you the ability to save a lot of energy. This particular area ended up with a reduction by 30% of the amount of energy used, which actually increased the water use efficiency. But in 3,000 hectares, we actually had the opportunity to save enough energy annually for 300 houses. There was a 32% reduction in water. So again, less water used going on has reduced the amount of energy that's used to drive the irrigator around, much and all as it's based on a gravity system. We use 20% less nitrogen since 2016 to 2020. And we have been able to, or 2019, and again, if we've reduced that, we've reduced our nitrous oxide emissions. With nitrogen, we are always applying nitrogen, either now with a nitrogen inhibitor on it, or otherwise, and also in front of an irrigator or in front of a rainfall event. We need to make sure that we're not having any volatilization. So nitrogen use efficiency has gone up significantly. Very much targeted site-specific application, variable rate fertilizer based on what the crop requires, based on the soil type. And this has resulted in a 22% reduction in nitrogen and in fertiliser at different times and different crops. It's not always specific. We've also reduced the number of cows that have been empty on our dairy farm by the use of technology. So if we can do that, then we've got a lot lighter footprint than what we've had in the past. But most importantly, if we do these reductions, our emissions intensity per kilogram produced is significant, because that allows us to continue to have high crop production with a reduced amount of carbon emissions. So what's next? What's next for us is we're only limited by our imagination. We have lots of opportunity to continue to be better with technology and reduce our inputs, but also reduce our outputs of emissions. We're always looking at the latest technology as we go forward, and we want to be able to be more sustainable financially, environmentally, and also reduce our carbon footprint.
Okay. Hey, that's super, Craig. Now, we've got Craig, Rick, and George sitting here, and so I just want to give them each an opportunity, given that they shot these wee videos a week ago, whether there might be a missing point that you want to make or anything of clarification now having watched your video. So, Craig, before we move on to our next speaker, is there anything you want to add to your wee video?
No, probably there might be a few questions. I see one's just popped up there now, but maybe that's a better way to answer it. I think most things are covered. It's a very short amount of time to try and cover up what we actually do. But
no worries, that's cool. Okay, well, I'll just give you that chance. Okay, so we're moving on to our second speaker, and our second speaker is Rick Burke. Rick and Jan farm sheep, bull, beef and dairy grazers on their farm Pukekori in the foothills of the Kaimai Ranges near Katikati in the Bay of Plenty. They won the supreme title in the 2014 Bay of Plenty Balanced Environment Farm Awards. In the last 20 years, Rick has worked through his farm environment plan, redesigning the farm to create a win for his farm systems and profitability, and a win for fresh water, greenhouse gas, and biodiversity. So we're going to pass it over to Rick's video and have a listen.
Welcome to Pukekori Farms. My name's Rick Burke. We're farming bull beef, sheep and dairy grazers in the foothills of the Kaimai Ranges, just south of Katikati. I'm going to briefly talk to you about our story and how we've addressed fresh water, biodiversity, and now greenhouse gas. Firstly, a little bit of a background. Pukekori Farms is in the Tamania subcatchment of the Tauranga Harbour. And like many hill country farmers, our farm was developed over many years without fully understanding the environmental impact we're making with that development. In 1998, the Tamania subcatchment was regarded as one of the highest contributors of sediment by concentration in the Northern Harbour. So if you think about it, our forefathers, I guess, were the heroes. They slashed and burnt the country to develop our farmland and our landscapes the way they look today, but we've probably overshot the mark in a few areas. And so we're now at a point in New Zealand where we need to take stock of the health of our landscapes. And I applaud the current government for making this a priority. And I would add in his policymakers must ensure that policy design incentivises positive environmental, economic and community long-term outcomes in a balanced way. So our journey of Pukekohe Farms is a logical progression and a natural progression as well. In 1998, we were approached by our Bay of Plenty Regional Council in regards to the sediment loss from our hill country. So our first step, we took a stocktake of our natural resources. We used natural capital approach to implement our land and environmental plan. We used land use capability principles to redesign Pukekohe Farms to optimise land use. The redesign focused on breaking the farm into land management units for either farming, production trees, retirement, and now the carbon opportunities. By 2003, profitability had improved considerably on less land area, which is a great story. And by 2003 also, ecosystem health had improved considerably. And this was our new focus on biodiversity as we saw the birds and that coming back and the improvement in our streams. So we formed a community pest group, which is still running today, very successfully. So moving on, after 20 years, with our land environmental plan development almost complete, our focus now is on carbon. This hasn't been a sprint, it's been a bloody marathon. But look, as a fellow said to me one day, hey Rick, you actually sprinted the first part of it. And I said, what do you mean? He said, you did your land and environmental plan and you understood where you're going to head. So what he was saying was we've built the foundations, the framework, we had the plan, we had our works program, and we had a high resolution map to work on to see where we're going to go in the future. And that's been hugely powerful. I'll add in that the plan didn't always stay the same, and like many things, they don't stay the same. We altered things as we went along, as we learnt on the journey. So currently we're working with a community catchment group called Project Karori, and in our Tamania catchment, it has been selected by the Bay of Plenty Regional Council as a pilot catchment for comprehensive and integrated community-led approach to sustainable land use and environmental protection. So I think this is quite a powerful photo. It's a snapshot of Pukekohe Farms after 20 years. There's me when I had a bit of hair, my hand on a post looking down the farm. And then 20 years later, hand on same post, but I can't see an awful lot because of all the plantings. But if you look back in 1998, if we look at nitrogen for a start, through Overseer, we estimated we had a nitrogen reference point of about 10. And we're carrying 10.7 stock units per hectare, which is quite extensive farm. And we had a land use capability average class of 5. Our carbon footprint back then was unknown, of course. Our environmental scorecard back then, and this was gathered by the regional council, Bay of Plenty Regional Council, was a poor 2 out of 10. It wasn't good. That we weren't in good shape. And our profitability across the farm wasn't going that well back in 1998. According to the economic farm service data, via beef and lamb, we were in the low quintile 2. So moving forward to 2018, our nitrogen reference point increased. We've just recently done that to 19.5. But our dissolved in-stream nitrogen number, as water leaves the farm, is at 0.38. And thinking about the government has put up a number of 1, so we're well within that. We've increased our stock units, carrying capacity to 14.5 per hectare. Our land class, of course, hasn't changed, but we've looked at our carbon footprint, and by 2023, we'll be carbon neutral, and I'll talk about that as we go on. Our environmental scorecard is an impressive 9 out of 10 now, and that's according to the Regional Council and freshwater colleges. So we're extremely proud of that. And our profitability on farm is now in the high quintile 5, as per the beef and lamb economic service data. So looking back at 1998, the farm was a blank canvas. This was just a raw map back then, and you'll see the black outline around it. Doesn't tell us a lot, but there weren't a lot of paddocks, and all the paddocks ran to streams for water. There's very little water articulation. So this was, as I say, truly a blank canvas, and water articulation was a big part of our farm redesign to get stock out of water. The powerful thing was the natural capital approach to, and this was to optimise land use. We had that at the back of our mind. So through that understanding of land use capability classifications, this is a recent map just done, we've updated it, but back in 1998, we had a fellow who had the skill set to walk the farm to understand our soil types, our risk around LUC classes. So we actually mapped the farm on a physical farm walk and decided what we're going to do in terms of land use around that. So today, the redesign of Pokakari Farm, we have it in land management units, and this is just a Pokakari Farm paddock map, but also we have the land management units broken into forestry blocks, retirement, wetlands, etc. 20 years on, and this was our vision, to create a mosaic of land use, and we say where farming fits the land. And I think this is what we've got to sort of get farmers to think about in the hill country, the opportunity. And I think when right tree, right place is very appropriate, but there's pockets of land within our landscapes that we can farm on and really optimise profitability and land use that way. You'll see in the foreground there's a wetland, and that was once just a boggy stream with a fence down the middle of it, and no bird life, no biodiversity, and now it's full of biodiversity. And in the back, on the other side of those cattle is, of course, a production block on some steep country, production pines rather, on some steep country. So through this we've had a win for profitability. We call it our first win, because you've got to be profitable. It'll be in the black to make all this work. And with this came easier management. Farming stock on appropriate landscapes, right stock class on right landscape. Our second win has been for the environment, improving ecosystem health, and here's a large cockapoo, giant cockapoo found in one of our streams. And of course, the logical progression is to look at carbon once you've done this work. So Pokakari Farms actually found it quite difficult to get a carbon calculator. We used P.F. Olsen, who was running one of our forestry blocks involved with my brother down in Gisborne, and they did the calculation for it, for our carbon footprint. So you'll see 2023, we come through the zero line and carbon neutral at that point. We realised that if we harvest trees, we're going to, because this is with no harvest, we'll move the other way. So we're actually just in the process right now of doing another 9 hectares of indigenous forest plantings as well as production trees. So some key messages from myself, hill country sheep and beef farmer. Keep it simple. Take farmers on a journey of positive transitional change. And in relation to greenhouse gas, I haven't focused at all on the split gases because I don't think it's landed in the right place yet. I think there's still a lot of discussion around that. So our focus has been on carbon. I believe we've got to get farmers to focus on carbon first and get them on the journey. I believe policy's got to incentivise a carrot first, farmers to redesign their farms to optimise land use. And with that, taking responsibility of their own environmental footprints, that's really important. The government needs to do some stuff. It needs to fast track and promote appropriate tools farmers can use to make informed decisions about land use change. You know, like ourselves, we struggle to get the greenhouse gas calculator, and I believe there's one, the government has one out now. So there's still work to need to be done in that area so farmers can just put their hands on the tools. The big one for us right now is the mapping tools, because it's part of the journey to take farmers on. The GIS mapping and LUC mapping tools, they're not in all our regions across the country. We need to have generic tools that farmers can use so they can make informed decisions. And that's firstly understanding, particularly in the hill country, overland flow of water, accumulation of sediment at points across the farm, and which we call critical source areas. I believe we've got to get away from silo thinking. We've got to link, like we've done on the farm here, link fresh water, biodiversity and greenhouse gas together as they are intrinsically linked. Focus on catchment communities. And this is a powerful a way to drive change, and I believe it's a vehicle to drive change. We've got to stimulate and promote a future vision for 2050. As you see, this has taken us 20 years and we're still doing stuff, and we've gone as fast as we can. We've had subsidies from our regional councils, generous subsidies and help all the way, but it's taken us 20 years plus to do what we've done. So we've got to get the farmers to think about, and I think about look out to 2050, I think is a good target time, and think about the creation of a mosaic of land use with vibrant communities, maintaining our vibrant communities where farming fits the land, and that's my vision for the future. Policymakers need to think about the long-term implications of poor policy design to avoid the decimation of our rural communities. So if we're thinking about offsetting principles, robbing Peter to pay Paul, I think you're just going to get pushback from hill country farmers. I've woken up to this. So let's do this by creating an environment for New Zealand farmers wanting to rather than having to. Let's get the farmers around New Zealand to understand what's under their feet, the opportunities in the redesign of their farm, to take their farms to a new stage, a future stage of development. Thank you.
Cheers, Rick. That was a really, really interesting talk. Any points that you've now looking back thinking, oh, gee, I forgot to say that? Are you all happy? You're on mute.
Yeah, I'm pretty happy, Mark. Yeah, I just think farmers got to think, we've got to create a positive environment. We've got to get them to look through a lens where they can see what success looks like, and understand. I'm just repeating what was said, but understanding the opportunities under their feet, and that applies to all farmers on all landscapes. And the settings around this need to be fair and equitable for all our sectors, and they've got to be doable with timeframes that are workable, so that we can transition into a new way we do things.
Cool, excellent. Okay, rightio. Now I see there's lots of questions mounting up, but we're now moving into our third speaker of the morning, and our next speaker is George Moss. And so here's the wee background on George. George and Sharon own two small dairy farms of around 70 hectares each on the outskirts of Tokoroa, milking between 170 and 180 cows. George and Sharon's personal goal is to build a strong and resilient dairy farming business that can operate successfully and profitably in the new of constraints around impacts on air, soil and water. That is a resource efficient business. George has been heavily involved in a number of regional projects, including work with Waikato Regional Council, Dairy New Zealand's P21 project on Live Farm, and working with Dairy NZ on developing sustainable milk plan for the area. He's really passionate about farmers, farming and rural communities. He's a member of the Rural Support Trust, supporting members of the rural community. So let's hear George's story now.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for the opportunity to participate in this webinar. I'd just like to put a few caveats on the presentation that I'm going to give. I don't want anything that I say to be interpreted as excuses for not changing the way we operate our farming business. We are absolutely committed to endeavouring to reduce our environmental footprints. We are learning as we go, and our solutions may not work for everybody. In this process, we've been actually fortunate enough to have participated in the Dairy NZ partnership farms, and we're also participating in the Dairy NZ step change. And what I'm going to actually go through with you is just what's actually happening in one of the businesses. And in the first slide we've got up, it's just the overall vision for that business, and that is part of a 10-year plan. And so within that plan is the actions that we're actually looking to do to actually reduce our environmental footprint, as well as move on the business to the next generation. Moving to slide 2, who are we? With George and Sharon Moss, we have one young son, Daniel, and we're actually quite a diverse business. We own 2 small dairy farms. The 67-hectare dairy farm is managed by a farm manager, and the 72-hectare dairy farm is managed by my wife, Sharon. And we have a dairy grazing unit, and just off the side of that, we do lease out 8 hectares of land to a forestry nursery. So we are quite different. We have different to some of the other farming businesses. We do have a strong focus on profit and resilience, and we have focused that on to how does our business survive in the low milk price years, and is resilient in terms of not only a milk price but in environmental compliance. So, but that does have an opportunity cost when the milk prices go up. Our next slide just gives you a really big overview of how our business actually performs relative to the others. And these figures are actually out of Dairy Base and have been put together with the assistance of Dairy NZ. In terms of greenhouse gases, we're largely about average. It's slightly better, and we've come in this year at a slightly better number, about 11.5 tonne per hectare. Our stocking rate is sitting around 2.6 cows a hectare, whereas the 6-year Waikato average is around that 3, so we're about 14% less stock. Our operating profit, as measured by Dairy Base, is about 70% higher on average over the 6-year average at 3,700 versus 2,000. Milk solids a hectare, much on a par. We're slightly behind the Waikato average, but milk solids per cow is significantly above the Waikato average. So we drive our business as trying to get as much efficiency out of the existing capital that we've actually got on the ground. I also have here an excerpt from the business plan that we've actually got, because in that business plan is sets of aspirations, not only environmentally but also socially and financially. And what we have found, it's very, very easy to actually stick some actions in there when you actually come to implement them in terms of actually on farm at the time, as you come to grips with droughts and various things. It does get a lot harder. Quite comfortable that we'll get to a 10% reduction by 2030, are making reductions around the use of N, and we have planted a number of trees. We only managed to reduce nitrogen applied per hectare this year by 5 kilos, not the 10, as we try to recover from this year's drought. Mitigations that we've currently been implemented, we are actually trying to look at 2-tier farming, and have joined the Tree Crops Association to that ends, because we do see a future if we can have one form of crop well above the ground and above the cows, and and obviously the dairy operation as well as getting some carbon gains there. Where we have got a big focus is on herd improvement, and really trying to improve the quality of our cows. It is already a good herd, and we have a goal of trying to get it up into the top 10% of the national herd as measured by PW. We are using the sex semen over the better end cows, and we also have a Wagyu contract. As mentioned before, we are reducing end applications, and we also have looked at, we've got using TrackMap now and have done that for the last 8-10 years. And when we look at that, it has been really handy in making better management of N and better placement of N. When we looked into it, we found some paddocks were getting over allocated nitrogen, and other paddocks were getting under allocated. We have given strong consideration to herd reductions in the coming season, and the challenge around that is just when do you actually do it, and to what scale. We're continually trying to reduce the amount of imported feeds. We are currently at System 2. Probably in a year like this one, we creep into System 3, and we're trying to get as close to System 1. And the challenge around that has been actually trying to manage droughts and feed shortages beyond the normal. We're also looking to lift the average age of the herd, and what I'll come to later is just how a lot of these mitigations, while correct in themselves, actually do work against each other to some extent. Actions that are happening and about to happen, we're looking to get more modelling done with FarmMax in particular, and we have done some. FarmMax now has a greenhouse gas component to it, which is really handy, and we have been running Overseer, and I have used Overseer since its inception. What I need to do is get it running more live and start running the scenario models as we actually go through the season. As mentioned before, we're looking to drop cow numbers, and to do that, because we're already at a low stocking rate, it's quite a large bite of the bullet. It's just who goes and when goes, and it's most likely to happen this year. We didn't do it last year, just trying to capture some of the opportunity around the milk price that existed at the time. We are following up on the tree and crop partnerships, but that's a lot easier said than done. And part of this is to continue to build our knowledge. But look, this whole greenhouse gas thing, nutrient footprint thing is a real balancing act. And the classic is this year. It's the challenge between the immediate profit. We have a milk price in excess of $7 this year. And the other side is that it's getting immediate gas reductions. This year, we actually chose to actually dry off the cows quite early. Large part of that was the drought. We could have actually purchased a large amount of feed and probably have made a profit at the $7 plus milk price on that feed purchase, but it would have absolutely blown out our greenhouse gas reductions. It would have increased that footprint quite substantially. So that's sort of the challenges that we actually try to come to grip with. And I have to say, when you're running a business, those are quite hard challenges. What we've got is also, in the medium term, trying to make sure we get repeatable profits year in, year out. And I think we're nailing that quite well. But to absolutely stabilise and get these greenhouse gases coming down, part of that is also looking further out is if we want to maintain profit and taxable profits, we've actually got to improve our balance sheet, which fundamentally means reducing debt. And reducing debt has the challenges, obviously, it's out of tax-paid profits. But if we can actually start to focus our profit on making gains below the EBIT line as opposed to in the past above the EBIT line, that will give us the opportunity to significantly reduce gases. What I've got in the next two slides is what I call the toilet paper problem, and sorry for the insensitivity around that. And why I call it the toilet paper problem, we know in theory that if we use both sides, we can double the hour efficiency, but there's some practical applications around that makes that not possible. And when I look at all the mitigations that we're actually working on and going through, each of them has pluses and each of them has minuses. And some of that's just purely in cost, but some of it actually compromises greenhouse gases in the short term. And the trees is the classic. We planted quite a few trees this year and plants, but there was a $16,000 cost to that, which does actually get hard to repeat going forward. As said before, we have a big focus on improving the quality of the herd, and we want to get into the top 10% as measured by PW. So we're using sex semen, which is giving more heifer calves on the ground, which gives us greater selection. The downside to that is obviously we're compromising conception rates, and we've found it hard to sell any of the surplus stock. Improving the herd age does give us greater production and greater efficiencies, but it does lower our genetic gain. And equally, when we reduce cows, we actually reduce costs, which is actually good. We've got an improved herd, but particularly when we've got managers on the farm, it does make management very, very hard. And if management's not right up to par, you have lost production and potentially some of the other KPIs blow out. The reduced replacement rate is something that we've looked at very seriously, and there's obviously cost savings there. But then again, we actually compromise our rate of genetic gain and potentially have more bobby calves dropping out. And equally, because we're a high-performing herd, if we drop production through dropping cows, yes, we have the plus of less purchased feeds, but potentially a drop profit and a debt blowout. I won't go through them all. They're available for you there to actually have a look at. But one that I will touch on, and because it's quite dear to our hearts, is that part of the solution to the greenhouse gas challenge on farm is a lot more efficient cows. Now, when we started farming 30-odd years ago, the efficiency component of an index made up about 85%. Now, only 48% of a cow's index is made up by feed conversion efficiency. And I think as an industry and as a nation, that's something that we've actually got to look at, that we create an index purely around the efficiency of a cow to convert feed to milk solids. If I go further down to the next slide, this is what I see as the real big opportunity for New Zealand dairy farmers. And what I've got here is 2 cows that are individual outliers within our respective herds. There's cow 153, which is a Holstein cow, relatively big cow at 560 kilograms. That's a measured live weight. And you can see that she's done well in excess of between 500 and 600 kilograms in a relatively short lactation, and one of those lactations on once a day. Cow 146 was a Jersey cow, had a measured live weight of 480 kilos, and she did 3 lactations before her udder failed, in excess of 500 kilos of milk solids, and even did that as a first calver. Then we had heifers there. To me, that is the opportunity that actually exists within dairy herds. We do have a target within the herd of trying to get 500 kilograms of milk solids from 160 cows. So that is looking to reduce cow numbers from where they currently are. And had we not had the drought this last year, we would have done 480 kilos. As it was, we did 432 kilos, 1,150 milk solids a hectare, dried off on the 27th of March. So these cows go hard and they go fast. And I think that is, in fact, I'm quite certain that is part of the solution to reducing our greenhouse gas footprint. Look, the way forward for us, and we've spent a lot of time thinking about it, hence the 10-year written plan, is to play the long game, chase the permanent gains. So we absolutely acknowledge that in the short term, there's some relatively significant costs to our businesses. This last year was an absolute classic with the high milk price. We walked away from quite a large opportunity cost there. The other part is that we've got to continually fix our balance sheet, get our debt per kilo down, build in resilience that way. So the amount of cash that disappears out of the business to our financiers actually reduces over time. So looking to lift the net profit more than probably the EBIT line. And obviously a key part is changing the stocking rate around that. The other debate that we've actually had within, do we look for gradual incremental changes, or do we look for the massive big step changes? So at the moment we're going incremental changes, but one of the things we could have done was just drop cow numbers by 10% and book those gains and absolutely roll on. We'd have to have a high degree of confidence around that, and particularly around our management, but that is an absolute option. Or if one was being cynical, one could actually leave the step change to later on as the pressure around the reductions came. And I guess the question that we actually have to ask ourselves there, and what we've made, is we have to do the right thing. There is a moral obligation to do the right thing. So we're going for those incremental changes over time to hopefully, we will get that 10% by 2030, but hopefully a lot more. So look, that's a very quick race through of what our business looks like, what we're actually trying to achieve, and hopefully gives you a bit of a flavour for the challenges that we actually have on farm and getting that. But look, I'd like to reiterate again, we're absolutely committed to cracking this nut, and I actually believe that we can, but I do believe dairy farmers and farmers as a whole are going to need quite a bit of support around this, because it is quite different to anything that we've had to do before. So on that note, I would say thank you.
Cheers, George. That was really interesting. Just before we whip into the questions, and I see there's been a few getting answered and moving through, but we'll get to them in a second. Do you have any kind of last minute notes, George, or points that you want to make that you've now thought of, having seen yourself do your delivery?
Okay, never like seeing myself, but a couple of points I'd like to make. A couple of points I'd like to make. Look, when I refer to capital, I actually look at capital both being natural capital and also the financial capital. So it's about efficiency around both those. The other thing that I'd make, which is not directly related to my speech, look, absolutely agree with the previous two speakers and the points they've made there. And I just want to reiterate again that particularly for the number of very efficient farmers out there, the gains can be relatively small and hard to actually achieve. But regardless, all farmers are going to need quite a lot of support around this space because we're trying to work in, you know, three movable parts. One is obviously financial, one is around the soil and the water, and one is around the greenhouse gases. And when you start trying to pull all those together, it actually gets quite complex. Last simple comment is, I believe as farmers, if we go after gases, we'll get water by default. But if we just go after water, we may actually potentially exacerbate our greenhouse gas profile. So back to you, Mark. Thank you.
No worries, that's fine, George. Okay. So while these really interesting and wow, some very impressive stories, gentlemen. I take my, well, if I had a hat on, I'd take it off for you, but really, it's very inspirational what you three in your farming interests have done. So there's a few questions come up, and I'm going to kind of quickly run through one or two each, or one each, and then we'll get some more general questions. We will get a view from all of you on the questions. But firstly, there was a number of questions coming up around precision agriculture. So this one's to you, Craig. You've really drawn on that, the whole idea of precision agriculture and knowing things pretty tightly. And that's been a theme around New Zealand for a while. Why do you think farmers haven't gone for this in a big way? And do you think there is some things that we might want to do or think about it differently? What's your view on the use of precision agriculture in a more broad sense?
Yeah, I guess it's interesting. We're probably using a lot more precision agriculture than what we think. And if people already know what their outputs are and what their inputs are, then they probably are already on the track. So why it hasn't taken off is I guess it's been seen to be a bit complicated, and I guess it's only as complicated as we want to make it out to be. There needs to probably be a little bit more support with industries, people around how to get rid of the complexity from the system and see what the return on investment is. The return is significant. So, for example, we put variable irrigation on, and I think we paid for it within 12 months, if not just over. So it's hard to quantify always what all those return on investment opportunities are, and I think we need some help with getting the numbers right so people understand it. So the numbers that are gathered at the moment, I think, will be very helpful to understand where their businesses are.
Cheers, thanks, Craig. Next question's for you, Rick. It's, I think, come from a dairy end, because the way it's written, but it was with our integrated farm plan team, we have seen incredible measurable production and dollars in the bank quite quickly. How many years did it take for you to see results coming through in a sheep and beef operation?
Yeah, good question, Mark. Look, I think firstly, when we went into our farm plan, and this was tailorized for what we're doing on our landscape, it just opened up my eyes in terms of the opportunities, and I think that's what's missing. The right farm planner that comes in, someone that you can trust, that can really highlight, particularly in the hill country, think about our land use classes, can really highlight opportunities on landscapes I've never thought of. So the other thing we did with our subdivision, getting our rotational grazing systems right, learning off our dairy farming cousins around grass management, thinking about what we did in farm in terms of subdivision and water, it showed a 35 to 40% return on capital. Now, people wouldn't believe that, but Erica Van Reenen and Phil Janot from AgFirst have done similar calculations around water fencing, and it's seriously good. And the banks need to get in behind this and support farmers. So inside the farm, within 5 years, we were making significantly more money.
Excellent, excellent. Very good. Now, question for you, George. Obviously, what you were describing, there's a question here. What do you think the potential of two-tier cropping, the shade, the animal health, and also tree crop is across your operation, which is something you're kind of just embarking on or have been dabbling into. What's your views?
Look, I think there is a potential, and I haven't actually sort of landed on where that potential is. We are probably have a less benign climate, or way less benign climate than, say, the Bay of Plenty. So I'm really in this knowledge gathering phase and talking to people. And our model that we actually want to do is somebody else actually plants the trees and harvests the trees and takes the income off the trees. We actually provide the land. Obviously, it maybe takes some shade from the trees themselves. So it's trying to develop a partnership with other people who understand trees and tree cropping and integrate it into ours. And there's a whole lot of wins there. What the final picture looks like, but we've got money, if you like, sunk in land. Land is a big cost to somebody wanting to do tree crops. I don't understand tree crops that well, but somebody might have that knowledge, and they partner with us, and there's a win-win for both ourselves, but also for the environment. So, haven't got a definitive answer, sorry, Mark, but that's what we're trying to get to.
Yeah, and I suppose you have to look after the old pest control, because I'm sure the possums wouldn't probably mind a feed of any tree crops you might be offering in lines across the paddocks. Hey, that's cool. Now, a bit more of a more general question that's come up, which I wouldn't mind all three of you responding to. There's a question about what is the role of the input companies in the sense of sustainability and what we're talking about today. What's the role of the input companies, the likes of the Balance, the Ravens Downs, the fertilizer inputs, and the output companies? So who takes your product? So if it's a dairy company or a meat company, your Fonterras, your Alliance, Silver Fern Farms, things. What do you think individually, and we'll start with you, Craig, is their role in this whole space and helping you to get where you want to go to?
I think they, well, on the input side for a start, I think they certainly have a responsibility to demonstrate where technology can make a difference and helping farmers reduce their inputs and being more efficient. The two main ones, I guess, are cooperatives, so they have a responsibility to look after the shareholders as well, and I know they are doing that and looking at that. So how do you find new technology? I guess that's one of the key things for them. On the output side of things, so if we look at some of the seed companies that we deal with, we work closely with them around the best varieties. They do a lot of breeding, and I guess on the Fonterra side of things, I think there's a responsibility there, and the Synlays and the others around how do they help drive efficiency on farm, reward it. If you don't reward it, then you probably don't have the right drivers in place. So there's a need for both both sets of those companies to actually make a difference around efficiency drivers. The government needs to be involved in what drivers look like and having the right driver to make the most appropriate decisions.
Rick, what's your view?
Yes, well, look, if you think about the fertilizer companies, I think they, like Craig, they have a responsibility to really look at technology and go fast with this to help farmers. But they also have a responsibility around responsible supply. And I don't favour monitoring inputs at a government level, but I think the fert companies, they have all the details on our farms. They know how much nutrient we're taking. They should be able to have like a green, amber, red warning lights if we're exceeding certain nutrients at certain times of the year, etc. I'm just thinking about that. In terms of our exporters, Fonterra, our meat companies, I think they have a significant role to play in responsible procurement. And I know in the meat industry, we've been working with Beef and Lamb New Zealand around taste, pure nature, and underpinning that story. Because if we go to the marketplace, we're going to tell that story with integrity and honesty. So it's got to be underpinned by good standards. So Beef and Lamb New Zealand, along with the Red Meat Profit Partnership, are working through some standards that will ensure we're addressing our environmental issues, our biodiversity, and our animal welfare. And I think that's really good. And you start rewarding farmers for that, and the almighty dollar really talks, and you get people going on the journey.
Cool. And George, what's your view on the output and the input companies you work with in their help?
Okay, look, I'd have to be actually quite a bit negative on some of the input companies and a little bit of on the tech companies, and I will actually tease that out. Look, to actually get these changes, it's about providing information in a simple format that farmers actually understand. And I'll be critical of the fertilizer companies. I've seen reports from 2 companies currently. One was actually inaccurate relating to our farm. If that was other farmers, they probably wouldn't have picked up the inaccuracy in there. So if you put garbage into something, you will get garbage out. The report from the other company, which will remain nameless, but it is farmers owned, you know, you almost need to be a scientist just to actually understand that report. And I have used technology, been a big fan of TrackMap. But look, let's be honest here, that technology doesn't actually deliver a nitrogen applied average annually for me. I can do it per paddock, but not for the farm. So as we're on this journey, I think the technology companies and the input companies actually need to make information a lot more farmer friendly. The other part of that is I get tired as a farmer inputting the same information from different companies about 4 times to get the outputs. In this day and age, we should be able to pull that together just by me giving one authority. In terms of the marketing companies, we deal with the cooperatives, and I have actually found them you know, quite supportive, and we have had those discussions. What needs to happen is they need to probably make farmers more aware that we're not the only primary producers around the world that are embarking on this journey. And if we don't actually get on this journey and get well on the journey, that in the marketplace where the consumer ultimately decides, we risk being left behind. I don't think there's enough clarity around that message yet. So that's my take on things. Sorry to be a bit negative on the input side, but that's the reality.
Mark, could I just make a comment there on the technology side? George is exactly right. Like, companies that overpromise and underdeliver on the technology are a major handbrake on people actually picking up technology. If you don't get what you say you're going to get, so absolute proof of placement should be a no-brainer from technology companies. It should show where the kilograms go. This is all doable today. You can have 50-metre exclusion zones, whatever it looks like, away from a waterway, away from a gateway and a water trough. All of that is completely doable today, but it actually needs to be very clear that they are delivering what they say they're delivering, because it is a serious handbrake on people picking up technology.
Great
Absolutely.
point.
Absolutely.
Great point. There has been a question asked, have any of you done a life cycle assessment of your properties and the kind of analysis that might bring?
We've looked at LCAs over a range of things, because I think you've got to have a very broad view of what that actually looks like. So if you don't understand all the cost and the footprint of all the machinery and all the fuel and everything else that comes into it, then how do you actually fully understand it? Not many models take that into account. So it's a difficult one to get right, but I think it's a very key point to be able to understand what ours is. So if, in other words, if we're bringing in breed animals from somewhere else, part of our LCA is actually the footprint of where they've come from. So we have to be very honest and clear about it.
Yep.
Look,
George?
just add to that, Mark, we haven't done it in a formal sense, but we have done it in a very much a intuitively way. So thinking about, you know, the tractors we drive, the lifespan of those vehicles, trying to push those lifespans out, keep them going. We've made more towards a self-contained type unit, rightly or wrongly, because the cost of moving stock backwards and forwards and all those sorts of things. So very much we've done it on, if you like, a common sense type thing. Does this make the footprint worse, or does it make it better? Quantified it in absolute greenhouse gas units? No, we have not.
Okay. Rick, do you have a comment on life cycle analysis?
Yeah, like George, we have not done anything formally, but it's just I guess it's just part of our mindset and our thinking now of being as efficient as we can and thinking about carbon. What are the implications going forward? So so everything we do relates to you know, what we're doing in terms of our freshwater, biodiversity, and now carbon.
Yep. Now it's gone 10:30, but I've got one quick question for you guys to respond to, and then we'll call it a day. there's been the question of you've done all this in your business. Would you? Sorry, let's start again. The question is all the understanding and what how you progressed your businesses. Would you have done all of this in your businesses without greenhouse gas being part of the equation? So what's the answers to that, given that this is a series of towards a low emissions future, but if you took away the concerns on emissions, would your businesses be looking similar?
So for us, it's not the driver at all. So it's one of the consequences and the opportunities. We were doing all of this anyway, and it's interesting. So environmental sustainability, financial sustainability, greenhouse gas emissions reduction, all go hand in hand. So it doesn't matter which camp you want to sit in, whether you want to be green or whether you want to be intensive. If you get all of that right, you can do all of it. So it's certainly not the driver, but it is one of the drivers for us and a consequence of what we've been doing for quite a long time. We were already down this track well ahead of this.
Excellent. Rick?
Yeah, so just like Craig, look, it is a consequence, and for us, it's been a journey. You know, starting at the start around our problems around fresh water, and I think farmers, you know, they always say, well, what's the problem? If you can tell them what the problem is, and they can focus on it, they'll get on and do some stuff, and that's a great driver to get going on farm plans. So it's been a natural progression for us, you know, as I explained in my presentation, and so we've done all this work now. Now carbon, greenhouse gas has popped up, and we're addressing that.
And George?
Look, probably the same as the others, very much a natural progression. We've always been a little bit in this space because we've been acutely aware that, you know, all our operations do have an impact on the environment. And as our knowledge has grown, it started off around nitrates and that, and then it became an awareness around, hey, this greenhouse gas might be a thing. But we were on the path anyway, so it's what we've done is just sort of quantified it a lot more, put some numbers around it, and probably pushed up the pace of change and brought it up the priority list, as opposed to let's just see what it is. It's actually, yeah, changed the ranking for us to some degree, and I think this last season was a classic where we pulled the pin on the cows quite early as opposed to buying feed.
That's great. Thank you, gentlemen. Just picking up what you said earlier, Craig, I think you're all probably green farmers, really. I think you're not. I think you're well and truly in that camp looking after your land and doing those things. That's been some really wonderful presentations and great responses. There's lots of questions I see from all around the world. Welcome to Paraguay. They're having a listen in. I suppose that's the power of the webinar, and South Island and all through the country. So it's been wonderful thing. See, and that brings to a close this this webinar, but there are a couple more to come, or 3 more to come, I think. And so please, for you people out there, register for the next webinar in the series that takes place this time next week. And we will answer those questions, and this full video will be put up in the next few days. And so many thanks for your participation and the great questions, and hopefully you've had an enjoyable 1 hour listening to these really bright and sharp farmers. Thanks very much. Cheers.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Mark.